The question of God's existence is one of the oldest and deepest questions humanity has ever asked. For thousands of years, people have searched for an answer, gazing up at the starry sky, trying to understand the nature of lightning, disease, birth, and death. Today, in the age of science and technology, this question hasn't lost its edge. In fact, it's become even more relevant, precisely because we now have tools that allow us to test reality, to distinguish facts from wishful thinking. And the more we learn about the universe, the clearer it becomes. The hypothesis of a supernatural creator not only lacks supporting evidence, but also runs into a huge number of logical and empirical problems. Let's calmly and methodically walk through the main arguments that lead thinking people to doubt the existence of God, or to deny it altogether. This isn't about insulting anyone or ridiculing someone's faith. It's about having an honest conversation grounded in facts, logic, and observations of the world. When we try to understand where the idea of God even came from, it helps to look way back into ancient times. Our distant ancestors lived in a world full of dangers and unexplained phenomena. Thunder, lightning, drought, disease, the movement of the sun across the sky, all of this seemed like the result of someone's will. And since even the strongest tribal leader couldn't influence these phenomena in any way, it seemed perfectly logical to explain everything by the existence of greater, transcendent forces, which, just to be safe, you'd want to appease with some kind of offering and show your respect to these invisible powers through certain rituals. The human mind instinctively looks for agents behind events. If a rustling in the bushes might be a predator, it's better to assume someone's there and run than to stay and get eaten. This tendency to search for intentionality helped our ancestors survive, but as a side effect, it gave rise to a belief in spirits, demons, and ultimately, gods. It's interesting to trace why, in many religions, deities are thought to live up in the sky. The answer is simple. For our ancestors, the sky was the most unreachable, majestic, and mysterious part of the world. The sun gave warmth and light, and the harvest depended on it. The stars were incomprehensibly distant and beautiful. The heavens were a place humans couldn't reach, and so they were the perfect place for higher powers to reside. Just imagine the sheer terror an ancient human would have felt at a lightning bolt striking a tree, accompanied by frightening thunder. No wonder the Greeks came up with a great god, Zeus, who ruled over thunder and lightning. And in Hinduism, you can find references to a deity named Indra, who was also the lord of the sky. The authors of the Bible, living in a culture that already had a concept of a heavenly firmament, naturally placed God up there. This was a poetic and cosmological image of its time, not a result of divine revelation. But times have changed. We've sent telescopes into space. We've seen that there's no throne above the clouds, just a vast, hostile void. And once science started explaining the world without the need for the supernatural, the foundation of religious dogmas literally began to crack. The theory of evolution by natural selection, proposed by Charles Darwin and repeatedly confirmed by genetics, paleontology, and molecular biology, showed that the complexity of living organisms doesn't require an intelligent creator. Research by anthropologists shows that humans arose through evolution and share a common ancestor with other modern great apes, like chimpanzees, rather than being created in their finished form by some supernatural force. Eyes, brains, limbs, and so on, all of these emerged gradually, step by step, under the influence of blind, natural forces. Where people once saw the hand of God, we now see the relentless but mindless work of mutation and selection. What's more, if we even for a moment assume that the God described in sacred texts exists, a truly chilling picture unfolds. If you look closely at the world supposedly created by such a God, you can't call it good. Quite the opposite. It's incredibly cruel, and it's obvious that only a maniac could have created it. This argument is known as the problem of evil, and it's perhaps the most emotionally powerful one. Can an all-powerful and all-knowing being, described as a heavenly father or even as love itself, really have created a world in which billions of living beings have been eating each other alive for hundreds of millions of years? In the wild, suffering has no moral meaning. A lion tearing apart an antelope or a parasite slowly eating a child from the inside over years. This isn't punishment for sins. It's the very design of life itself, which believers claim was created by a benevolent designer. When we go to the ocean shore and admire a beautiful sunset, mentally marveling at this divine creation, we're clearly overlooking the fact that at that very moment, a genuine slaughter for survival is taking place among the ocean's inhabitants, where only the fittest survive. Not noticing this, religious people try to find something transcendent in that evening scene, calling God a great artist. Yet a person can just as easily become prey for predators in that same ocean. Predators that couldn't care less about whatever laws, religions, or fantasies he's dreamed up. One might object that suffering is the result of humanity's fall from grace. But animals were suffering long before humans appeared. Dinosaurs got sick, starved, and broke bones. The entire history of life is a chronicle of pain written in fossils. If God exists, He designed this mechanism. He created predators and prey, viruses and bacteria. Such a God doesn't merely allow suffering, He made it the very foundation of creation. To call Him good would be to strip the word good of all meaning. It's clear that thousands of years ago, people were already perplexed by the problem of injustice. As a result, some religions developed the belief that all suffering and apparent injustice is the result of bad karma, and that every living being endlessly reincarnates into the conditions it deserves. And as if that weren't enough, there are supposedly other worlds where suffering is completely absent. But here's the thing. All these heavenly realms in religious imagination are populated by people and animals. And as we know, people and animals can only emerge through natural selection, which inherently involves suffering and a constant struggle for existence. So did evolution also happen in paradise? If so, the idea of paradise as an ideal place without suffering is completely incompatible with reality and is the product of someone's rich, yet ultimately primitive, fantasy. But perhaps God doesn't interfere in earthly matters. Maybe He simply created the laws and then stepped back? That brings us to another argument. If God exists, it has no effect on our lives whatsoever. We live in a world governed by strict, unbreakable laws of physics. If I pick up a glass of water right now, lift it, and turn it upside down, the water will, with 100% certainty, fall down. It won't fly sideways, won't freeze in midair, won't turn into wine. No amount of prayer, no level of holiness will change that outcome. We don't observe miracles that violate the laws of nature. Everything that happens has a natural cause. So even if we imagine that God exists, it makes absolutely no difference in your life. Following this logic, whether God exists or not, there's no practical difference at all. Another facet of the problem of evil and absurdity is the so-called dilemma of hell. Many religions claim that the souls of those who didn't believe in the right God or who led unrighteous lives are doomed to eternal torment. But eternal punishment for temporary, even if very bad, actions, that's not justice. It's infinite, insane cruelty. The finite life of a human being, even if they were Hitler, is disproportionate to an eternity of torture. To attribute such a punishment to a being called a loving father is psychological and moral nonsense. This is one of the reasons many people walk away from religion without even digging into the scientific arguments. Now let's turn our attention to the astonishing diversity of religious beliefs. There are several thousand religions on the planet. Christians, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, followers of traditional African cults, they all have their own sacred texts, their own revelations, their own rituals. And the majority of these systems claim to possess absolute truth, while directly contradicting each other on key issues: the nature of God, the afterlife, moral standards, and paths to salvation. If a single, all-powerful, and loving God really wanted to reveal Himself to people, would He have chosen such a convoluted and contradictory way? Why is His revelation given to a tiny group of people in a specific geographical spot, while everyone else is doomed to ignorance and consequently to damnation? The answer, it's a mystery, is unsatisfactory. A much more plausible explanation: all these religions are products of human culture, arising independently of each other under different conditions. This brings us to an obvious fact. In all of human history, not a single testable, reproducible piece of evidence for the existence of any deity has ever been produced. Science works with hypotheses that can be confirmed or refuted through experiments or observations. Studies on prayer, including the famous Harvard Project, have shown no statistically significant effect. People perform all sorts of absurd and meaningless rituals, wasting their time and even money, blindly believing that some invisible forces will appreciate their efforts and reward them. Now let's consider the principle of simplicity, known as Occam's razor. This methodological principle states that one shouldn't multiply entities beyond necessity. For instance, we have physics, chemistry, and biology, which do an excellent job explaining the world, from the Big Bang to the formation of galaxies to the emergence of humans. Introducing an additional entity, God, adds no explanatory power. It only creates new questions. Why complicate a model if it already works without it? If we can explain lightning as an electrical discharge rather than the wrath of Zeus or Indra, then the hypothesis of divine intervention is no longer needed. In the same way, as knowledge accumulates, the need for the God hypothesis to explain anything at all falls away. Modern psychology and neuroscience offer compelling models of how and why belief arises. Our brain is a machine that looks for patterns and intentions. We automatically attribute agency to objects. We see faces in clouds. We assign a higher purpose to events. Religion successfully exploits our innate cognitive tendencies, the fear of death, the need for justice, the desire for control over an unpredictable world, the feeling of belonging to a group. The promise of an afterlife provides comfort in the face of an inevitable end, and the belief in a rich and successful life in the next incarnation gave people from lower social classes an incentive to do hard and dangerous work, while also dampening their ambitions to claim a higher status. As for various wrongdoers, according to believers, they will all surely get what they deserve. God sees everything. In this way, a believer develops a sense of eternal justice. All of this makes religion psychologically appealing, but it does nothing to prove the reality of its object. Faith arises from the workings of the brain, not from contact with the transcendent. A look at the history of religions only strengthens this view. Conceptions of the divine have undergone a long evolution. The oldest known religions were animistic. Spirits were attributed to rivers, trees, animals, and ancestors. Then polytheistic systems arose, with pantheons of gods responsible for different spheres of life, as with the Greeks or the Norse. Gradually, as centralized power and empires grew stronger, monotheistic cults came to the forefront. Judaism itself began as a henotheistic religion, where Yahweh was just one of many gods, albeit the most jealous one. Only over time did he become the only one. This process of idea evolution closely resembles the development of any other human cultural practice: language, law, art. If a single divine truth stood behind all these systems, we'd expect to see a convergence of views over time, not endless fragmentation and changes driven by political and social circumstances. Even now, in the era of advanced technology, science, and artificial intelligence, many religious figures, when debating scientists, get uncomfortable questions and try to manipulate modern terms and discoveries to explain various religious claims. Their answers usually lack specifics, offering only vague metaphorical attempts to pass off wishful thinking as reality in order to maintain the authority of sacred scriptures. In real life, we don't observe supernatural interventions. No one has ever documented, under controlled conditions, an event that clearly violated the law of conservation of energy, the second law of thermodynamics, or any other fundamental principle. Amputated limbs don't grow back through prayer. Dead, decomposing bodies don't come back to life. Water stays water, and gravity stays gravity. Our entire civilization, technology, medicine, is built on the immutability of natural laws. If God exists, he either can't or won't break them. And if he doesn't intervene in the world, then talking about his existence is meaningless from a practical standpoint. Finally, we come to a metaphysical argument known as the problem of infinite cause, or the paradox of the first cause. Many believers claim, everything has a cause, the universe must have a cause, and that cause is God. But then a very reasonable question immediately arises. Who or what created God? If the answer is that God is eternal and needs no cause, then why not apply that same principle directly to the universe or its fundamental laws? Why must we make one arbitrary stop specifically at God? Modern cosmology, for instance, considers models in which the universe may be eternal or may emerge from a quantum fluctuation in a multiverse, with no need for an external creator. The God hypothesis doesn't solve the problem of the first cause. It just pushes it back one step, while introducing an entity with vastly more complex properties, an all-powerful, all-knowing mind whose existence is even less likely and even less explainable than the existence of the universe itself. So, we have not a single reliable piece of evidence in favor of God, but we do have a multitude of indications that belief in Him is shaped by our biology, psychology, and history. The world we observe looks exactly the way it would look without divine intervention, with a colossal amount of senseless suffering, with indifferent and blind laws of nature, with a chaotic diversity of incompatible mythologies. Adding the God hypothesis not only fails to explain anything new, but also creates mountains of insoluble logical contradictions. This doesn't mean that life without belief in God is meaningless. The realization that we ourselves are the masters of our own fate, that our life is finite and therefore priceless, can be a far more powerful motivation for ethical behavior and creativity than the fear of posthumous punishment or the hope of a reward. Life is one, and it's precious, whereas religion often labels us as a soul and treats the body as something material and insignificant. But in reality, we are our physical bodies, and we need to take care of them. The soul is just a product of our imagination. In my previous video, I discussed the topic of the soul's existence in detail, and I recommend you watch it as well. I believe that true maturity of the human mind is to accept the world as it is, without invented crutches, and to courageously take responsibility for our own actions, instead of shifting it onto imaginary invisible beings. So how do you plan to build your life after the illusions? Perhaps now is the right time to ask yourself this question and free yourself from the misconceptions that have followed us since birth. Thank you for your attention, and see you in the next video.